Well, should we get started with who we have?
Yeah, let's do
Start
it.
on time. Okay, let's go. Good morning, task force members. How is everybody today? I hope everybody is enjoying this quasi nice weather we're having, except the afternoon thunderstorms. We have, as always, a packed agenda for you today. So we're going to dive in with some good news or something you're grateful for. Doesn't matter however you want to do it today, but we just, you know me, like to start with a little happiness and sunshine where we can get it. So I'm going to start from the middle of the list and make my way down and then back up. So Michaela, would you like to start us off today?
She is preoccupied right now.
Okay, so Mike, you get to start us off today.
Thanks. Well, I'm grateful for, I got a green screen. But I realized I put a green shirt on, so I'm just a floating head. But after weeks of having my daughter's bedroom in the background and her having to duck when she comes in to grab stuff out of her room, I now can put myself anywhere I want, which is nice. So today we're in the Incredibles family, Pixar, or whatever it is, home from the first one. So there we go. But I'm gonna probably go change shirts, since otherwise I just end up floating like a head.
You do look like a floating head.
Yeah, so I'll be back.
Okay, Naomi.
Trying to think of something good. So I think I mentioned last meeting that my family was coming into town, and one of the things I was going to work on was buying plants. So did that, repotted a bunch of plants, including a cacti succulent that I'm really excited about, and I hope that it grows some beautiful little flower buds from the cacti. So fingers crossed.
Crossing my fingers for you. Patty. Patty, are you there? There she is.
He's on mute. There we go.
Sorry, am I not on mute?
You're good.
So my happy news is I was able to take an early morning walk, and because it had rained or is going to rain or was raining right before, it was just very beautiful. So
Lovely.
That's my good news. And then I'm going to disappear because I'm trying to put some biscuits in the oven.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
No problem. Peep.
Sure. Let's see. This weekend, we finally did our household Goodwill run, which means that I can find everything in my garage again. And so we've reclaimed the garage. It feels good.
Very nice. That is a good feeling.
Which, by the way, houses bikes, not cars.
Figured as much. Rhiannon.
My good news is that my garden is flourishing.
What's flourishing the most?
The sage and the basil, that is definitely almost an invasive species, but gives me lots of herbs to do different fun cocktails and to cook with, so that's nice.
Wonderful. How about Sam?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm actually going to do a grateful. I've really enjoyed all the sort of modified graduation ceremonies, whether it's been elementary school, middle school, or high school kids, and sort of how, despite everything that's going on, they're sort of tackling their achievements and enjoying the moment as best they can. And it's been really fun for me to watch. So look for your signs in your neighborhood, honk and wave, and give them some love.
That's great. Sebastian doesn't seem to be on. Did anybody see him, Sebastian? Nope. Okay. Thomas.
I guess I'm also happy that my garden is flourishing. I planted wine grapes this weekend, and that rain that we had knocked all the buds off of them, but I see that new buds are coming on, so I'm very thankful that they aren't dead.
Are you going to be making your own wine?
That's the plan.
Wow.
Happy hour at your place.
That's right. When all this is over. Tyler, how about you?
My parents are coming into town today, and so it'll be the first time that my dad gets to meet the baby. So that'll be fun.
Where do your parents, or where are they coming in from?
Montrose, Colorado.
Very nice. Enjoy.
Yeah, thank you.
Veronica?
Let me, am I unmuted?
You are.
Yeah. Okay. Good news is this past weekend, after trying to find like just a bike so our family could go out, we found a bike. So now our whole family has bikes to go on bike rides. But like finding a bike right now, it's kind of hard.
You should have asked Peep. I'm sure she has a garage full that she could have at least lent you one for a little bit.
I thought of it, but yeah.
Those bike rides have been keeping our family sane. So congratulations. Brandon.
So my good news is, well, my garden's not flourishing, but all the seeds are sprouting. So starting to get some vegetables coming in now. Well, the start of the vegetables anyway.
What are you most excited about?
Well, it's early still, so pretty much the snap peas are the only thing that'll be coming out soon. But today I'm going to be planting the corn and the watermelon and all the warm season stuff. So looking forward.
Very nice. I harvested my first row of radishes the other day. That was pretty exciting. So, Dominique.
Yeah, I'm going to do a grateful for. So I am grateful for technology, although I know we do this Zoom thing a little too much. We have used this pandemic to reconnect with friends that we usually get to see once every 2 years or so. And if you haven't done it before, last night we did a Netflix party with a bunch of friends from college, which is basically an extension. You all watch the same movie at the same time, and there's a chat function. So you can kind of hear from them as you go. And it was great because these are friends that we love. We only see every couple of years, but it's all the same when you all get together. So as much as this is a terrible time, it's definitely easier now than it probably would have been 10 years ago in terms of all the tech that we have. So grateful for that.
What movie did you guys watch?
We watched a movie called Okja, which I can only somewhat recommend. It is interesting. And if you're already sort of on the vegetarian vegan line, it might push you a lot further that way, but it's an interesting movie. So.
Emily. Oh, sorry. I caught you with your mouth
just
full.
a goodbye.
Sorry.
It's all good. That's what I get for eating on a live Zoom. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. My good news is that our new house is starting to feel more and more like home, starting to get out of boxes and get stuff put away. Honestly, my husband has done most of the work on that. He was kind of teasing me the other day because he was like, I've never seen someone be on so many Zoom calls with so many people all day long. This is like, how does everyone get a chance to talk? So we're learning about each other's work lives for sure in the midst of this. But yeah, house is feeling like home now more, which feels really nice.
That's wonderful. My son keeps coming in and is like, can I say hi to all your friends? I'm like, okay, buddy. So I haven't seen Eugene. Anybody seen Eugene? Nope. Okay, Frank.
Hello. My good news is that this week is our vacation week, and so we've been planting flower. I forget what it's called. It's a garden in a box that we get, and it is specifically to support bees and butterflies and pollinators and everything. So we've done that the last couple of years. We'll be getting another one soon, and taking over the grass in our lawn.
That's super cool. Jasmine. I saw you. Did she have to hop off? Okay, we'll come back to her. Jennifer.
Well, I was convinced it was wig day, so I brought out my special wig. But I have to take it off because it is so hot and uncomfortable. But I do enjoy looking at myself. No. I have two things. Good news. My son got his permit on Saturday. So as much as my, opinion about driving has changed as a result of this work, I am excited for him. And then there's a bill dropping hopefully this week that'll be $10 million of the CARES Act funding that will be coming to EOC for energy assistance for families. So cross your fingers. It's really exciting opportunity. So
wonderful. Congratulations. And we love the wig. Jasmine, I see you're back.
Yeah, my internet just wasn't having it. I had to restart my computer. But my good news is I also went on a morning walk, and that was amazing. And Patty and I are on the same wavelength because we also have the headscarf. She actually inspired me last time, so happy.
Looks awesome. I'm gonna have to learn to do that. That's amazing. Jessica.
Yeah, I mentioned last week that I am in the process of buying a new house and also selling one as well. So we put our house on the market last week and it sold in 24 hours, which was remarkable. I was planning on a month and then it sold in 24 hours. So that was a surprise and it's very exciting. So now everything's moving a lot faster than I was anticipating.
I bet. Oh my goodness. Well, congratulations. John.
Good morning. I have both good news and bad news. I'll start with my bad news. Unfortunately, yesterday I turned 40. So I woke up this morning with an aching back and my memory started to fleet. But my good news is that my son turns 3 today. It's his birthday. So we're 20 minutes apart on our birthdays. And so his favorite color is blue. So I'm wearing my blue shirt, my blue tie for him.
Oh, that's awesome. That's crazy. You guys are 20 minutes apart. Wow. Kathy.
Well, I have a grateful today. I am grateful that our peony bushes, which are right out in front of our house, are in full bloom. There's pink and white. And so if you see my eyes kind of gaze over, that means I'm looking right out the window at those beautiful flowers.
That's wonderful. I bought a new house last year and we have like 3 coming up in the front yard. So it's really cool to see all these things that are growing. So they're awesome. I haven't seen Kelly. I did see Lori though. Lori, I saw you. There, oh, Lori, you're on mute.
That doesn't help. I'm moving. So I'm grateful for a couple of things. I got to unplug and go on a hike. That was so awesome. It was amazing. It was a surprise hike. We thought we were going to be in the hot sun and it turned out to be tree covered and a little river. And it was just absolutely beautiful. And then I'm super grateful because today I'll be sharing with more of a global audience about heart disease, which is something we've been trying for a long time, but they found a way to tap in more people. So we've been struggling with getting more people involved. And so again, because of technology now, we can bring in people who normally can't attend events. And so we'll get to share the story on heart disease. So I know that's near and dear to you. So I'm super excited about it.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Lori. Michaela, are you back? No. Okay. Did I miss?
Good morning. Yes, I apologize. I am facilitating another youth meeting on the other side with Future Coalition. So I apologize to you all. I'm almost finished. I am doing very well. I'm very grateful this morning because a national task force for missing and murdered Indigenous women has been started, and I've been asked to be a part of that. And so I am very grateful that has be grateful and you know, that is my good news this morning for that being created and for me to you know, being the start and help for that being created. So
that's wonderful.
That's my good news. I hope y'all are doing well this morning.
Thanks, Michaela. Okay, did I miss any task force members? How about Grace? Grace, do you have some good news or something you're grateful for today?
Sure. I got to meet Liz for the first time in person yesterday.
Oh, wow.
we met up at City Park and went for a long walk. We were there for almost 2 hours, masks on, appropriately distanced. But you know, it's just, for me, it's really nice to meet people in person. So it was exciting.
What a weird start to a job you have had.
Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. And then Liz, I know Liz was having her daughter's kindergarten graduation was this morning, so I'm not sure. Oh, hi, Liz.
Oh, she's here?
I made it. Yeah.
Oh, good. You are my good news.
Yep, my good news is Nora graduated from kindergarten this morning, and so we got to go to the school and drive slowly down the street in front of the school and have a little parade, and all the teachers were waving and had signs, and Nora decided she wanted to decorate the car this morning, so we decorated, which was pretty fun. And I have my Roald Dahl scarf on, if you can see that.
Very nice. Thanks, Liz. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And Jacob, last but not least.
Sure. I would say I'm grateful that my girls love bugs. They went through a little bug scare, and yesterday Emma got her ladybug land with little ladybug larvae, and she and Amelia are just wrapped, just completely loving watching the little larva crawling around. So that makes me really happy.
Aw, yay, bugs are cool. My kids have been like playing with the worms to the point where I'm like, the worm's not moving anymore. So yeah. Let's see, my good news, everyone. On Monday, my mom, my wonderful grandma, watched the kids, and I got to go on a real hike, like a real grown-up. And I went to the top of Bear Peak here in Boulder, which is awesome. It is definitely the most my legs have moved since this thing began, because now all I do is sit like this. So needless to say, I can barely walk, but it was pretty awesome to be on top of a mountain again, which I love. So. Okay, let's dive in. Everybody, today we are going to, as you know, some of you have had office hours, or all of you have had office hours, or the opportunity to participate in the other group's office hours to kind of cross-pollinate, to see what are some of the solutions and the recommendations that each of the solution groups are making. What we have asked each of the solution group leads today to do is to bring forth kind of the general thinking about how their group thought about the recommendations for the 3 phases. And then if there was anything that they think is more controversial, we know that you are all super busy. And at the end of this, we are really hoping that all of you sign off and give consensus that you agree with what the full task force is recommending. So we've asked them to bring today potentially some of the solutions that may be a little bit more controversial that we want to walk through and discuss. Some of the groups don't think there is much controversial, so I've just asked them to give some highlights on some of the things that they are recommending. So we're really going to be diving in. That's going to be the majority of today. Then I'm going to turn it over to Jacob, and he is going to walk you through the results of the survey for the rest of the revenue options, for both the additional revenue options for phase 1 and then the revenue options for phases 2 and 3 based on the survey results. So we'll spend about 45 minutes on that. Then we want to close the meeting today with really talking about how you all want to roll this out. Do you want to try to host a virtual press conference? Do some of you want to write an op-ed? There's social media. How does the task force want to make the media splash that we're hoping for, because you will all be so proud of what you will be signing off on in 2 weeks. So and then we'll close right at 11 today. So that's the plan. Any questions for me? Raise your hand before we dive in. Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to now turn it over to Sam with electricity supply, who is convinced that nothing electricity supply is recommending is super controversial. So he was like, I can go first because I think it's going to be pretty quick conversation. So Sam, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, so this is my personal computer, so I'm off the web-based Zoom, so I can see everybody, but I have to use my work computer to read all of our notes. So bear with me, and feel free to jump in anytime with questions. But yeah, I think, everybody sort of understands I think in this group acutely what the city can control from an electricity generation perspective and what they can't. I think the most sort of bold thing that we've done is sort of from a goals perspective, expanded the scope of this effort beyond just renewables to include both renewable and carbon-free electricity options. So the idea here, Denver made the pledge to achieve 100% renewable electricity for municipal buildings by 2025 and community-wide by 2030. We all were very supportive of that, particularly, I think when we did the roundtable discussions in maybe February. But I think, what the theme that emerged from that was that carbon emissions are really what matters as it pertains to climate change mitigation, not just sort of electricity supply. So the technology pathway to achieve 100% carbon free, let alone 100% renewable powered electricity systems is going to be a challenge. I think Excel has acknowledged that. We all sort of understand that. So that's probably the most bold piece of this, which is, it's not just about getting renewables on the target, but really getting carbon free electricity. I'll pause there to see if anybody has any sort of questions about that before I just quickly dive into some of our strategies and phase one goals. And certainly Mike, Tyler, those who are intimately involved in this, please jump in.
Can you just briefly elaborate on what you mean by carbon free?
Yeah, so if you think about sort of just installing renewables, there's still associated carbon emissions with them, right? There's no sort of carbon-free solution at the moment, whether it's the rare earth minerals that goes into battery storage or the processing and manufacturing of, the different systems, or, even finding ways to take the natural gas that's already in the system and make it, more environmentally responsible. I think it's thinking beyond just we need wind and solar to, we need to look at the life cycle of these systems and figure out the best way to make it carbon free, because that's really ultimately the goal to mitigate climate change. Does that help, Thomas?
Just wasn't completely sure of if there's specific energy sources that are being suggested that are carbon free. I mean, are we talking hydrogen? Or what are we?
Yeah, maybe let me frame it this way. I think the idea was we didn't want to just say 100% blank technology or 50% blank technology and 50% blank technology. I think it was an attempt to sort of acknowledge that the technology was expanding, and that the last thing we wanted the task force to do was recommend sort of a narrow lane that isn't really carbon free, because, there's, like we talked about, rare earth minerals and solar panels, there's all sorts of sort of environmental impacts with getting these technologies installed. So I think it was really an attempt to be technology neutral, kind of framing it that way might help. So, if we mandate 100% solar, there may be a new technology that the city would be really interested in a year or two, or there may be some significant technology advancement. We wanted to be able to sort of acknowledge that the issue is the emissions and be somewhat technology agnostic is maybe the better way to frame it.
Okay, that helps.
To clarify, is the suggestion like since, a few years ago when the mayor and city council made a commitment to 100% renewable electricity, that we're changing that recommendation?
I think in our phases, we actually try to push up some of those, but again, somewhat technology agnostic, and just decrease the carbon intensity of the system and the emissions associated with the generation.
Emily, I know Sam broke up there a little bit. Did you get your question answered?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I didn't realize I broke
jump in
up.
here real quick, Sam. So one of the things that
yeah.
Is not allowed under Colorado statute to be called renewable is hydro. And Excel already has quite a bit of one large hydro plant online that could be, which would be a carbon-free resource. So that would be one of the existing technologies that may help go towards that 100% number. And then I think, yeah, there's some discussion here of green hydrogen or some other future technologies. And so that's why we end up sort of changing it away from renewables to kind of the greenhouse gas emissions free technologies, because the world is moving very quickly in this space. And so it may be overcome by events quicker. Hopefully not. There's plenty of room for solar and wind in this, but there may not be the 100% solution that we think right now.
Just for clarification for the process today, is there going to be written language that we can view before voting on, or the proposal? I'm not entirely sure how this is working right now.
Yeah, so everyone has access. I've sent the link a couple of times, but I'm happy to send it again. Everyone has access to each group's recommendations, drafts, and draft section of the report. It's all in the task force folder under final report. And so at any point you can go in and read, super transparent, read what the groups are recommending. I think at the end of today, and Jacob and I think we initially thought we would vote today, but I think what we would instead like to do is raise these issues today, allow you all in the next week to really read through the report, and then have a final vote at our final meeting. Jacob, is that still the plan? You're on mute.
I was on mute, yes. Yes, that's a plan. I think we want to make sure that we have broad agreement on these things, and where there are sticking points, we want to elevate those and work through those over the next week or so prior to the meeting. And then we will ask for each work group to take a little break from working actively in your document so that we can migrate it all into one common document. And we'll continue, as Marisol said, read through that, add your comments where there are concerns, you know, maybe some editorial concerns, but mostly we want the really content rich. I'm really concerned about this for this reason, and here's a possible solution. So yes, if, and no, but this instead type of comments.
And when is the last meeting? I don't remember seeing an email for that.
It's June 11th. So next week we'll be working on the final report, working in smaller groups through any of these small issues that need to be worked out. That gives us a chance to pull the entire report together. So we'll take a week off from these task force meetings, and then it will be June 11th.
I have one question for Sam or for the group, and I know this is electricity supply. It doesn't seem like efficiency is kind of a big part of, there's no major recommendations on reducing demand. And I know that that certainly comes into place in some other places. Just wondering if there was much discussion of that, or if that was just to focus more on the mix of the supply.
I think we focus more on supply. And actually, I don't recall anything in the report really about energy efficiency. Mike, Tyler, am I missing something?
We didn't talk about energy efficiency in this because it was related to supply. I think we did recognize at one point we had an exercise like, what if there was a big windfall of money from the feds? What should we do with that? And we did suggest that the first place to go would be to do energy efficiency retrofits on houses, specifically in underserved areas, kind of that backwards L that we've looked at a couple of times. So that was probably the only place, but here we sort of assumed we will need some electricity, and we left it to the buildings group to kind of deal with the EE question.
Okay.
Good. So again, I think that the piece I touched on was probably the most controversial aspect of what we did. Just at a high level, quickly running through, because I know we were supposed to be the quick one. Our first strategy is, again, to decrease the carbon intensity of the utility system. Obviously, that requires a good deal of work with Excel. So our first phase, I'll kind of run through the first phases of this, of each of these strategies, was to sort of strengthen the partnership with Excel Energy, other utilities, and make sure that the city's active in state legislative affairs and PUC proceedings, just given, again, the near-term influence that the city's going to have over that first strategy recommendation. Second strategy is expand distributed solar in Denver, rooftops and community solar. I think that's fairly self-explanatory, but again, assuming there might be some funding opportunities to fund community solar programs in the near term. And then the other kind of piece I'd point out is adopt the upcoming 2021 IECC building code, including its anticipated net zero energy appendix. Third strategy is to lead with municipal infrastructure, again, thinking about what the city sort of has within its purview, and there sort of prioritize additive renewable capacity above purchasing renewable energy credits in phase one, and then hosting community solar gardens at municipal properties through the Renewable Denver initiative. Fourth strategy is to educate and engage the community. Obviously, a big part of, I think, sort of achieving this goal is to make sure people understand where their power comes from, et cetera. And sort of immediate phase is to, through the climate equity lens, listen to problems and challenges faced by the community with an emphasis on sort of the communities that are often not focused on, and ensure that the solutions to those community problems actually help decarbonize. And I think there's one more. Fifth strategy, invest in energy workforce development programs. So really supporting and expanding programs for energy infrastructure training. We talked a lot about the failures of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds, kind of the 2008, 2009 challenges with jobs. I think our speaker about a month ago did a phenomenal job of talking about sort of, the pitfalls of translating funding into actual jobs. And so being mindful of that, we want more jobs, but we want it done well. And I think that's it. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Any questions for electricity supply? Okay, great. So we urge you all, if you want to read through all the recommendations, the draft report for electricity supply, again, it is in that drive. Please, if there are major issues, please reach out to Jacob and I, and we will be working through issues next week. Okay, so I do know that Eugene has joined us. So Eugene, would you like to say hi and give us a piece of good news? Where'd you go, Eugene?
Oh, yeah. I'm over here. Yeah, sorry I'm late. Good news. All the crazy stuff going on in the country. I still have sense enough to know that this tie and this shirt have too much going on together, but I'm here.
It's all right. We like it. Right. And then I also saw Jackie. Do you want to say hi and give us a piece of good news, Jackie?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can.
I'm here, I'm present, and it's a good morning.
There you go. Well, welcome. We're glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just ask one quick question on electricity supply.
Yeah,
was there any conversation about residential pace to increase solar on people's houses?
There was. I think it's a phase 2 recommendation. I think we acknowledge some of the challenges of the RPACE program and other jurisdictions, but we did include it, I think, as a phase 2 recommendation. And I know, Mike, you're sort of a better subject matter expert on this than I am. I don't know if you want to build on what I said.
Sorry, I had to dad there for a second. I apologize. I missed the question.
It was about RPACE and kind of our discussion around RPACE. I think we acknowledged some of the challenges associated with the existing RPACE programs, and we did include it as a phase 2 recommendation, and wasn't sure if you wanted to build on that.
No, there's nothing really to it. It's individual counties implement it, so there's just a lot of whack-a-mole to get it really well done in Colorado.
Thomas, did you have a follow-up or?
I would just like to see a recommendation for residential pace to be part of the package. I think it's extremely important, especially in regards to the energy efficiency side of things as well.
Yeah, I can read the actual language we have if you'd like, Thomas. For phase 2, so again, 2023 to 2025, it was implement an RPACE program in Colorado that adequately protects residents from predatory behavior. And that is under our strategy 2 recommendation for expanding distributed solar in Denver.
Okay. Jennifer, okay, Jennifer, you raise your hand.
No, I mean, we're really concerned about the consumer protections on this program. So I think that's really well worded to ensure those protections.
Great. Wonderful. Anything else? Oh, Frank, you raised your hand.
Yeah, same with Jennifer. I like that that's being accounted for. Not being a lawyer, I don't know what the word adequately means there, and is adequately completely, is adequately sufficiently, is adequately 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I think in our minds, Frank, it's a phase 2 recommendation because I don't think there's a good answer to that yet. So, you know, the city will have to sort of determine what adequate is, but I think we were specific to call it that predatory behavior issue because, you know, I think there was a lot of concern expressed by those in our group and others who joined, whether it was the office hours or the like, that there were some concerns on these art-based programs. And so I think we were confident that by calling out that there's this sort of predatory behavioral issue that the city needs to address, they could determine what was adequate. And that's also why it was phase 2.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's the since we're a recommending body and not, you know, an implementation body, then probably the strongest we can make our recommendations, probably the better, to leave less wiggle room or room for questions.
Agreed.
Great. Okay.
Do you have a language change there, Frank, or Marcel? Would you want him just to send that through you, or how should we work that?
Yeah, I don't have a language change there, and, you know, and so I think that like I would be fine with as it is. Maybe there's a parenthetical or an asterisk that says something that you know, no one's left behind. Like one is too many. I don't know.
Yeah.
Great. So Sam, if you can just highlight that in the document, we'll just make note of that and see if there's a stronger language we need to use as we're redrafting. Wonderful. Great. Any other questions for electricity supply? Okay. Thank you, electricity supply. All right, let's move on in the interest of time. Consumption and waste. Jasmine.
Hi. So I actually have 2 controversial items for you all that I would like your feedback on. I definitely recommend seeing the waste and consumption draft. We have 5 different categories: general waste diversion, food waste reduction, construction and demolition, consumption emission management, and circular economy, each with a whole set of recommendations for phases 1, 2, and 3. The controversial items are actually both under general waste diversion. One is require all commercial properties to recycle and compost. We went about this by separating it into 2 different categories: require multifamily to recycle and compost by phase 2, which is 2023 to 2025, and require businesses to recycle and compost. That was originally under phase 3 because of some concerns on infrastructure. However, with a lot of feedback from task force members and the public, we decided to move it up to phase 2, just because folks are saying it's time. So do you all agree on that?
Looks like Naomi has her hand raised.
Hey, Jasmine, I have a question. Just as you guys were outlining those 2 specific proposals, I guess, what are the challenges? Is it like the bins to actually collect? Is it the behavior change to getting people to actually, like, if you're looking at like an apartment or multi-family housing, getting individuals to do that and then having a space for them to actually take their items? I was just curious about that thought process around some of those challenges with actually implementing that.
Yeah, so actually, so this is actually one of the questions on the Consider It site, and it was labeled as an equity concern, but also a high impact, high order policy. So, I mean, it's not a one shoe fits all kind of deal. There's so many different cases, which is why we decided to separate both multifamily from businesses, because there are a lot of alleyways, and maybe there isn't physical space for another like dumpster for recycling or composting, or I don't know, there's just so many different scenarios out there. Does that answer your question?
That's helpful. Thank you. I'm wondering, I guess, did you guys build in any like incentives or just things that the city can offer to help with that in terms of making that transition?
I don't think we've talked about that. We do have in the report by Group 14 the different price estimates on what it would look like when we have incentives, and I believe we're getting another version on what it looks like when we don't have incentives. Is that correct, Marisol?
Yeah, I believe so.
Can I just add that the state has the Pollution Prevention Advisory Board and the Recycling Resources Economic Opportunity Act provide incentives that people can apply for to be able to address those kinds of things that you're thinking about, Naomi.
Thank you.
All right, so that was the first controversial item. And we got
hold on, Jasmine. John, you have your hand up.
Hi, Jasmine. I had a question about the education and the concerns about like commingling, and I'm curious how you guys talked about you know, the funding that might be needed to teach people what is compostable, what is recyclable, and what can't be placed there, and then the potential costs of commingling that stuff and the sorting and all that stuff that might happen by implementing that earlier.
Good question. So just talking about Boulder's Universal Zero Waste Ordinance that required businesses and apartments to provide the services, they actually used some money from the fee to buy reusable bags and give out to multifamily, as well as some compostable bags to give out to multifamily and businesses to help with that. They definitely have a very robust education system. So Boulder, they have a program called Carrot for businesses, where they go in and do constant training of employees, supervisors, facility workers, and they have a whole set of videos for businesses and apartments as well. We found that in apartments, it's a best case scenario to educate the leasing staff. And so when a new potential tenant comes in, they give them a tour of the entire property plus the waste receptacles and take a quick peek and say like, okay, well, this is how we recycle. Don't put things in bags, etc. And so we also see that it's helpful to have a point person on the property, whether it's a tenant or a facilities manager person or a leasing staff person or all, to be the point person to provide that education to new tenants in case they have extra questions, and also give them a guidelines as part of their welcome packet into a new apartment complex. So there's definitely an education and outreach part to all of this.
Great. Kathy.
Yeah, Jasmine, did your group look at all at the capacity of the firms that do the recycling? And are they going to be able to process everything if we are encouraging or requiring people to do more of the recycling and composting? Will it ultimately get processed correctly, I guess is what I'm asking.
Mm-hmm. Good question. Under phase 1, 2020 to 2022, we have developed and adopt a zero waste plan and ordinance in coordination with the solid waste master plan. And then that would also include tailored programs for different sectors like multifamily and businesses, particularly with education and outreach. So it's my understanding that recycling is more than able to take in all of the extra material. I'm not 100% sure about A1 Organics, our composting facility. So that first initial study would look into the capacity of what it would actually look like when everyone is recycling and composting. And I mean, we could also phase it in too. But yeah, I'm open to suggestions.
Can I jump in on that? So most of our recycling, so glass, so A1 organics, most of them need more material. So I think the point is valid that are we going to be able to have enough space? But there, you know, there's a lot of talk right now, especially with our glass recycling and organics, is that we have to ship it in from out of state right now to be able to meet the quantities that are needed for those recyclers. Plastic is one where we may potentially have an issue, but I think we're set up pretty well in Colorado, and there's a lot of work at the state level to increase that as well.
Good point. A pro is that this could definitely drive market development and jobs, which is part of our circular economy goals.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. Frank, and then Patty, I see your question in the chat. Frank, you want to go first?
Sure, and I think my question was mostly answered right there, but the question was how it relates to solution number 5, the circular economy, in order to be able to, you know, because collecting things is one thing, you know, we can all rake leaves, but then what do we do with the leaves once we've raked them, right? Like, so having a strong connection between the solution number 5 that you have in the circular economy with the increases will help reduce, you know, what you were just talking about, Thomas, too, of, you know, the transportation impacts and issues, and how we're able to make them there. So, like, are you foreseeing that a strong connection between those two pieces? Definitely. Or maybe how are you seeing that strong connection? Like, what do you think that, you know, how that gets applied? I'm sorry.
So we do have a couple of closed loops here in Colorado. The compost is actually too heavy to transport out of the state, so it all stays local. And we are suggesting some things like city projects should use a certain percentage of Denver's own EcoGrow, which is our locally made compost, into some of their projects. We know that Denver Water, for example, is already using some of that to help rebuild the soil. As Thomas mentioned, glass is a closed loop in Colorado because we have 2 glass bottling facilities in Windsor and Wheat Ridge that is actually taking back the clean glass from Momentum Recycling in Broomfield, melting it and making it into new glass bottles. We have Ball Corporation that's making millions of aluminum cans here in Golden. We have a steel smelter in the mountains. We do have a small, like, plastics recycler. Shoot, I'm blanking out on their name. It's like Plastic Polymers that's shredding plastic. And we have Springback recyclers who take back pieces, take them apart, so steel with steel, wood with wood, foam with foam, and recycle that. We have Blue Star recyclers that's taking in electronics. So we already have a good base for, you know, really jumping off and creating a stronger circular economy in Colorado. We don't have any paper mills. The closest paper mills are in New Mexico, and there are some in Washington State as well. So that's an area where we can improve. We can also improve with fabrics recycling, for example. We do have a construction and demolition recycling facility operated by 5280, and we're hoping that will be open to the public soon. It's currently only open to contractors and, like, developers with large amounts of waste.
Great, thank you, Jasmine. So task force, I just want to be conscious of time. We can take a little bit from the revenue conversation, but really we have 3 more groups to go through, and we're saving some of the more controversial to the end. So I want to be just really upfront with you all that if you have super questions that would have you, not vote for something, then let's bring those. Otherwise, maybe some of these just more, I'm just curious to know questions might need to be taken offline given our timing today. So are there any other questions for consumption and waste that would really need to be brought to the full task force because you would not be able to vote on something if this wasn't included or changed or something? Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, Consumption and Waste. Wonderful. And as I've said before, you all are welcome to read the full set of recommendations in the Google Drive. Okay. Dominique, you are up next with Adaptation and Resiliency.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So for Adaptation and Resiliency, there is a few different recommendations. The first you'll see is around just planning. So as Liz talked about many weeks ago, the city has not yet done a full adaptation and resilience plan. And so there are a number of recommendations around doing that, including looking at the risk evaluations, especially supply chain and some other things that we know that have come up during the COVID pandemic. So we have recommendations around planning. Next, we have recommendations around the indoor built environment. And so we've talked a little bit with the buildings group to make sure that those seem acceptable to them as well, but it's about resilience in the building code. And we kind of have a couple phases. So trying to start, if possible, with codes around new buildings, then moving to existing buildings over time and offering incentives. And then to mirror that, we also have recommendations around outdoor environments. So resilience, especially around things like stormwater, looking at things like tree canopy, thinking a lot about equity. And then from there in the indoor and outdoor environment, we go to recommendations that are more around recovering from climate-related disasters. And this is one area that I wanted to bring for the task force. I don't know that I would say it's controversial, but we actually think that it's something that kind of goes beyond just fitting neatly into adaptation resilience. So we have our major recommendation there is to establish an economic resilience and recovery fund. The idea here is that we've seen that a lot of vulnerable populations have not been eligible for various reasons or have missed out on the available funding to last through any sort of climate-related disaster, whether it be a pandemic like right now, or all the other things that we've talked about are possible. So this fund would try to supplement available funding from private insurance and other state and national funds, and particularly focus on low-income populations and people of color, as well as minority and women-owned small businesses. And we talked a little bit about the use of the word minority, so we're going to try and make sure that that's all consistent throughout. So that is the major one that I would love any input on. You can actually review the language we have in the link that Marisol has sent, but want to just make sure that we do that right, because we think that that's kind of a big recommendation and could have a long-lasting impact. Can just real briefly, the last overall recommendation is around community development for resilience. So we have a number of different kind of community engagement and plans for education to make sure that we're making sure that education is available and we're engaging the community, and that will be a major way that we work towards increased resilience. So with that, I'll just stop and see if there's any questions.
Any questions for the Adaptation and Resiliency group? Don't be afraid to ask questions. I feel like now I cut off all the questions.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. The conversation we had around minority is that since this is a long-term plan, that the reality of the numbers of people of color are going to exceed that as what considered to be the majority population now. And then by removing the word minority, which has a negative stigmatization, that it would be more inclusive by removing that term minority, since the statistics will show that that will not be the case in terms of population numbers.
Yes, thank you, Lori. And we have flagged that and we will make sure that we are using consistent language, and I've flagged that from the conversations that minority is probably not the best word to use.
Awesome, thank you.
Other questions for Adaptation and Resiliency? Any changes or concerns you see with their recommendations that you want to put out there on the table? Okay. Okay. Gosh, Dominique, I guess I should have had you go first. Wonderful. Okay. Transportation, Peep and Naomi.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give an overview of our draft plan as is, and then Peep's going to elevate some of those strategies that we want to get just feedback from the task force on. So just in looking at our overarching goals around transportation, we really focused on reducing the number of single occupancy trips that are taken in Denver from 75% to 50, increasing the amount of commuter trips that are taken by transit, increasing the number of vehicle registrations that are electric, and then just truly having a transportation system in the city that is multimodal, accessible for all, affordable, and resilient, with the ultimate goal of an emissions-free, affordable, convenient transportation system. So our solutions to help us in achieving those goals focus, first one, on making transit accessible, affordable, reliable, and convenient. So really looking at opportunities where the city of Denver can partner with RTD on increasing the frequency and coverage, especially in denser areas of the city, looking at some state level policy actions around removing fare requirements for RTD. One of the things that Peep's going to elevate is just the discussion on a dream is to really have free transit, but literally trying to identify which communities need that the most. And also looking at partnerships and programs to help with the retention of drivers so that we can ultimately have reliable service in the areas that we need it. Our second solution really focuses on reducing vehicle trips. So looking at strategies around managing parking and right-sizing parking, looking at other strategies too around entities that do delivery service in Denver, potentially looking at some pilots around e-cargo bikes for delivery services, but really trying to reduce the overall amount of vehicle trips that individuals take, as well as those that work in more industrial spaces. Okay. Number 3 is really focused on reallocating public space. So looking at how our streets can be a potential place to increase those that are using them outside of their vehicles. So looking at land use policies, looking at repurposing travel lanes and adding in bus only lanes. This concept that we've talked about before is really having a network of car light and car free streets in specific neighborhoods. This aspect too of placemaking and greenery, as well as a space to just really encourage people getting out of their cars, but also reducing emissions. Number 4 is increasing clean vehicle options. So looking at ways that we can improve the infrastructure around electric vehicle charging stations, especially in apartments or multi-family housing locations. Also looking at the ways that we can increase not only electric vehicles, but also bikes, and creating that infrastructure that will support both of those, so charging stations and whatnot. Changing behaviors via new options and incentive programs is another solution. So these are things that we talked about before that have really been just elevated because of COVID. So looking at incentives for employers to develop telework policies, incentives for employers as well, and looking at transportation demand management plans for larger developments, but also having that maybe be a requirement of those employers in the city of Denver. And then number 6 really focuses on expanding and embracing innovative mobility options. So really looking at that space of micromobility, electric bikes, scooters, and other types of emerging transportation, and making those accessible, especially in the neighborhoods where we don't have transit as reliable as we want in the immediate, knowing that that is our end goal, but wanting to have some options that work for people in the immediate. So those are the 6 areas. I could put in the chat the document if folks want to go through that, but I'll turn it over to Peep to just elevate some of the things that we want to bring it to the group's attention.
Sure. Thanks, Naomi. We wanted to pull out 4 things very quickly. The first 2 are really in the realm of land use and transportation policy recommendations, or smart growth recommendations. And that is policy really that results in compact development or mixed use development and infill, because that combined with transportation improvements is often one of the most impactful ways to reduce emissions. It's essentially about favoring density over sprawl so that we consume less land. When people are able to live together a little more closely, then we're just traveling like shorter distances, and it's easier to create sort of those dense, frequent, moving people around systems that we're talking about. So those two items really are, one, eliminating parking minimums. I'll come back to that. And then two, eliminating single family zoning. Parking minimums are local laws that require new buildings to have off-street, a certain number of off-street parking spaces. So what these tend to do is typically kind of push homes and businesses further apart and impede walkability of neighborhoods, also raise the cost of housing, because when the builder has to build the parking, that's rolled into what you're buying or what you're renting. And what we know is that given the opportunity, developers will tend to build less parking. So eliminating parking minimums will allow them to respond more directly to the market and not overbuild parking. Parking minimums have been eliminated in a variety of different cities already. So we have some nice models to follow here, including in Cincinnati and Buffalo, in New York, in Indianapolis, in Kansas City, and in Seattle. And we're highlighting that for you just because we know when we talk transportation and land use policy that this is often an area of real public debate. Second area, eliminating single family zoning. Single family zoning essentially is the default in most areas of the country. About 75% of the residential land in most American cities is single family zoning. And what that really means is that as the default, it's not possible to build anything other than a detached single family home without some kind of an approval process. So what you do when you eliminate single family zoning to sort of invert that process, you can always still build a single family home, but it creates this space for what's called the missing middle, where you can begin to be more creative with your space. And that's stuff like ADUs, duplexes. You know, when single family zoning is the default, what you can't do easily is build things like apartment buildings, senior housing, low income housing, student housing, mother-in-law apartments, and so on. So we're recommending going after a policy that eliminates single family zoning in Denver as they did in Minneapolis. So I'll stop there. And then I got two other quick things to highlight.
Kathy has her hand up.
Great presentation, you guys. Just a quick question on the single family zoning. Would it make more sense to say, instead of eliminating single family zoning, say that you're eliminating the default single family zoning? And that way it doesn't read to people like, oh my gosh, if I really want a single family home in Denver, I can no longer have it because you're eliminating that zoning. And so maybe just adding in because it made far more sense to me when the way you explained it about it being a default. And maybe if we can just add the wording about eliminating the default process, that might help. I'm
positive there's a way to wordsmith this much more effectively. So yeah.
Great. So Peeper and Naomi, will one of you kind of highlight that section and we'll just make sure that we wordsmith that a little bit? Wonderful. Thanks, Kathy. And thanks, Thomas, for agreeing with that. Other questions on this, on the transportation so far? All right, Pete, please continue.
So just quickly, we want to highlight for you that we are recommending bus rapid transit in starting planning early, but basically in phase 3. And just so everybody really understands what bus rapid transit is, it's different than the transit where we've talked about in phase 1, which is buses and increasing the frequency and affordability of our bus system. Bus rapid transit is essentially like taking a subway system and building it above ground. So it's a whole separate network that you have separate boarding for, you buy a separate ticket for, moves people fast, long distances. Everybody's probably heard of Colfax bus rapid transit. So envision the ability to get quickly from East Colfax to West Colfax on a separate system, and how much that might reduce car travel on Colfax, and also hopefully bring a lot of people to some of the businesses on Colfax, the ability to get more people to places more quickly. So it is one of the most costly things that exists in the transportation package. It's also one of the most robust. It's extremely awesome, and it's extremely expensive. It's one of the reasons our package is so much more expensive. So highlighting that for folks. And then finally, we are still debating a little bit how we discuss what kind of free transit we're recommending. So we're either moving forward with, we want to recommend that Denver has free transit for everyone, like Kansas City, or, and this is what we're currently leaning toward, that we are segmenting, that we want free transit for youth, seniors, and low-income populations, and then to work with RTD on a more affordable regular fare structure for everybody else. I'm proposing that, I think, at this point, because I think it is achievable, particularly considering the condition that RTD is in at the moment. But I would like a little bit of feedback if people think we're going in the wrong direction and we should be going for free transit for everyone.
Pete, can you, what was the time framework on the free transit recommendation?
I think that if it was free citywide, we'd have to be looking at phase 3 because it's so complicated. I think that if we did the free transit for youth, seniors, and low-income populations, that we could be moved up.
I think if it was free for everyone, that would just encourage people to use it more rather than being segmented.
Yeah, one of the things I've struggled with is that Casey's system handles a lot less trips right now. So, you know, at a rough estimate, they're moving about 43,000 people per weekday. And that's maybe half to a third of what we're trying to deal with just in our downtown area. So it's a huge lift.
Pete, do you have any idea what the cost difference would be, whether it's free for everybody versus free for the groups you mentioned?
I'd have to go back to group 14 to take a look at how they costed it out, but no.
Celeste, I know you're on. If you do have those numbers, if you could just chat them out, would be wonderful. If you don't, no problem.
Yeah, the estimate was based on the current ridership. So I don't have information on what percent. If we knew what percent of riders are in those categories, we could break that out, but unfortunately we don't have that currently.
Thanks, Celeste.
This is just a general question, but has there been any federal talk? I'm just curious, post-COVID, if there's been any talk about doing a push on redoing our transportation systems as a public works project on a federal level.
So there is some movement right now at the federal level to do a reauthorization. And I've forgotten what the term is, but basically it is their big, it's like a half stimulus, half transportation bill. And if they move that forward, Denver would receive some significant funding that they could apply to things like transit projects.
Great. Frank, you've had your hand up for a bit.
Yeah, if you're to your question, Pete, I would be in favor more of the access in the immediate term than the freeness, you know, of it. It's always a value proposition, you know. Giving me something free that I don't want or doesn't get me to where I need to go is not giving me anything. So if the transit system takes me to where I want to go, then there's a value associated with that. So affordable for me is the key word, that nobody should be prevented from taking transit because of costs, just like nobody should be prevented from having a home because of costs.
Thanks, Frank.
So I think,
sorry, go
I'll
ahead.
put my email in the chat just so if folks have further thoughts on the transit, we can capture them all as we look to finalize this report next week. But go ahead, sorry.
Great, thanks. Mike.
Well, I just want to point out that I think we had a big emphasis on equity, and we can really bring it home for equity by prioritizing those groups versus waiting longer to get everybody you know, free transit. So I'm with Frank. I think prioritizing the groups that you know, we need to prioritize should be our bigger goal, or our first goal anyway, before somebody like myself who can afford $3 a day to ride the train gets it.
And just one clarifying question. I think this is what Mike was alluding to, but is the idea that it would we would first be working on free transit for some of the groups that Peep outlined, and then eventually we'd be working towards free transit for all, or is it sort of a, you know, one solution or the other?
If we were to say that our goal was free transit for all, we would start with the youth, senior, low-income populations and build up. I'm asking the question, is free transit for all the right goal?
Mm.
Should we take a quick poll?
I think I got some of the information that we're looking for.
Okay.
And I did provide my email in the chat, and I would love to hear from other folks if they'd like to email me.
We could do a quick poll.
Okay.
So
why don't you move on and I'll build the poll real quick.
Okay, perfect. We'll do a quick poll on that. Just real quick, I do see a 512 number has joined us on the phone. Can you please identify yourself? 512-557-2850. You're on mute.
*6 on mute.
Okay. Well, they hung up. Okay. Peep, anything else you wanted to elevate?
No, that was it.
Okay, great. So Jacob's going to create the quick poll, but as he is doing that,
I'm going to launch.
Oh, there it is. Okay. If everyone could take a poll. So are we free transit for all or focus on specific populations?
And focus on specific populations means that the affordability is on those that need it and not everybody.
Yeah,
Right.
so like
Exactly.
low income,
Seniors
youth,
and
seniors.
Yep.
Can anyone not vote that needs to vote but is not able to?
Yeah, who's on the web?
Okay. Okay.
Jacob, I'm impressed with your polling abilities.
Thank you. That was pretty fast. I'm ending polling to share results because I think that'll help.
So you're about 73% or want to focus on specific populations first.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, great. Last but not least, thank you, transportation team. You guys, I know, have had a heavy lift there. We do have one more number that has been on for a while, 720-413-4271. Can you please identify yourself? You're on the phone.
I just unmuted you.
720-413-4271. If that's your phone number, can you please identify yourself?
All right. Seeing that they haven't identified themselves, I'm going to remove them from the meeting.
Thank you. Okay, great. So last but not least, buildings. John.
All right. Great group. I think we had an incredible membership in this group and a lot of experience. And so we went into quite a bit of detail. I want to just start off by mentioning that, reiterating that buildings are a really critical part of this solution. About 49% of total greenhouse gases emissions come from buildings themselves. And so we really believe this is a key part of reaching our goals. We did set some reduce energy use goals. We decided that by 10% by 2025 in existing buildings, 30% by 2030, and 50% by 2050. And so we're striving to both reduce energy use as well as get to zero heating emissions. A couple quick things about how we went about this. We broke buildings. All buildings aren't the same. And so we broke this into some categories, one being commercial buildings. So that would be office buildings, industrial buildings, multifamily apartments and condos versus single family homes. They're very different from how we would approach them. And so we decided to talk about them differently. And then the other thing that we broke out was new versus existing. Very different approach to trying to encourage and require new buildings to be built to a higher standard than trying to retrofit existing buildings and all the differences that exist there. And so we broke these into these different categories as we were talking through these solutions. So I'm going to get into some of the recommendations and I'll highlight what we wanted to elevate. So first, on new buildings, from a policy and code recommendations, we felt that pushing new buildings to higher energy standards quickly was the right approach. It's much easier to make improvements and make changes very fast. And so we really focused on not only adopting the current green code, but also creating a system in which that green code gets implemented pretty regularly and very quickly. We wanted to try to get to, by phase 2, net zero energy requirements on all new buildings. And there was a specific call out for affordable housing I'll talk about in a second. And then for phase 3, we looked at going into an outcome-based code. So actually looking at real results and driving that versus specific mechanical systems or those kind of things. A couple things that we felt in this first section on new buildings that we wanted to elevate and get everybody's feedback on were some of the incentives that we talked about to try to get new buildings to speed up how fast they adopt some of these things. And so we talked about things like density bonuses. So allowing developers to build a taller building, for example, if they individually elected to go higher on their energy standards. And obviously that has to do with where density should go, and it ties to transportation and other things. Another thing that we talked about elevating was building materials specifically. Buildings can be built in a whole variety of ways, and typically commercial buildings are built out of steel and concrete. But there is sort of a trend to look at timber buildings. And obviously there's a different kind of footprint. It's more of a renewable material if you build something out of wood. But there was also some questions about deforestation and other things. And so wanted to see if anybody had any thoughts on that. And then the last thing that we wanted to elevate was affordable housing specifically. We had a lot of conversations about the need to make sure that affordable housing was on pace when they're being built, that they're on pace with every other building as far as the energy efficiency and the way that they're built. But we also recognize that affordable housing is very tight from a financing standpoint, and that if any new requirements are put on affordable housing buildings that are going to increase the cost, that we would not want to do that unless there was a funding source specifically tied to paying for that in an affordable housing project. We recognize that we don't want to put higher energy requirements on affordable housing, which has the unintended consequences of building less affordable housing projects. And so if we can't identify funding that can help supplement affordable housing energy upgrades, then we think that there should be a way to carve that out and not put that requirement on there. So I wanted to get everybody's feedback on that. I think it'd be helpful if maybe I paused and got into those 3 topics before moving on to the others. So any questions or feedback, or anybody on the buildings subcommittee that would like to point out anything I missed?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks. Hi, Lori.
Hi, so we just wanted to emphasize again, and throughout all the different committees, that we're really making sure that equity is at the forefront of all the decisions that are made in regards to buildings and specific neighborhoods, knowing that what would be considered a vulnerable community now may change because of the demographics with gentrification, and that those individuals who may be outnumbered at some point would still be represented, and that we don't isolate the restrictions just on neighborhoods because the neighborhoods are transitioning, so that we're just specific to the individual residents as they have different needs in their neighborhood.
Thanks, Lori. Others? Any questions? Any concerns you want to raise for the buildings group?
All right, I'll then jump into existing buildings, which was a little bit more complex. And I think one thing that we really focused on is that buildings come in very, very, very many different sizes and uses and types and all those things. And so we realized that in existing buildings and trying to retrofit and renovate and bring existing buildings up to a higher energy code, that it was impossible to sort of set a standard and then hold everybody to that without having some options and ways to sort of navigate the nuances of different buildings. So that was something we spent a lot of time talking about. Obviously, our goal is to try to bring existing buildings to a higher standard as fast as we possibly can, but we also felt that there needed to be more of a runway. So with new buildings, we went very fast, very early in phase one. But with existing buildings, we talked a lot about how we wanted to share early where we were going, but give everybody a pretty long runway before it had to get implemented in a lot of cases. And so setting clear expectations, but then letting people know that there's going to be time to implement it. We're obviously trying to get to electrification. We're trying to get to some of these energy upgrades, but we talked a lot about when and what might trigger those upgrades, rather than a date certain, different events that might happen. And so a couple things that we wanted to elevate was some of the flexibility that we had talked about as far as both like affordable housing and similar to the new buildings, about identifying funding sources before we require them. We also talked about historic buildings and how there are certain restrictions and regulations on historic buildings. And we want to make sure that we're not necessarily creating conflicts between what we're requesting of building upgrades and what preservation regulations provide. We also talked a lot about what might trigger an energy upgrade or a mechanical system upgrade. And so we talked about two main things, and these are both items that we'd love to elevate to this group and get feedback on. One was waiting until there was a replacement. So if you had an air conditioning system and it needed to be replaced, at that point when you did replace it, you needed to replace it with a more energy efficient electric system, rather than just say at this date you have to do it, even if your existing system still works and is still functioning. We didn't want to encourage people to throw a bunch of functioning systems into the landfill without needing to replace them. And then the other area in which we talked about a trigger point was if a major renovation happens on a building, even if it's not specifically on that system, that might trigger something called a substantial alteration. So when you change a building in a significant way, at that point you have to create energy upgrades. And then there was one that we had talked about, but we hadn't really fleshed out, which was primarily on existing homes, only requiring the upgrades when a building had been sold. So we didn't really want to require that a home that had been owned for 40 years by somebody all of a sudden is forced to upgrade their systems. That there had to be some transaction in which somebody could be prepared for what was coming down the pike versus somebody that had owned it the whole time. And so we thought about this idea of a transaction being a trigger point. I think that was everything on the existing buildings under policy and code that we wanted to elevate. Anything I missed, buildings group?
Mike has his hand up. He's not part of the buildings group, but he has a question.
John, the last thing about the sale triggering a need for upgrade. So I support the first two things. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's some equity questions there. If someone's going to buy a new HVAC system and we're forcing them to upgrade to more efficient, but there's an upfront cost. Well, my head just disappeared. Sorry. Anyway, my green screen's still not working. Anyway, if I think we have to deal with the equity issue of requiring folks to buy more expensive systems with an upfront cost, even though they'll save over long term. But really, my question was around the sale of a building triggering an upgrade. Whose responsibility would it be, the buyer or the seller, to upgrade the systems in your guys' world there?
It's a great question, Mike. I think what we had thought about was that it would be the buyer. And the thought was that there would be certain disclosures, like you would typically see when you're buying a home, that you go in and you're looking at buying a home and there's a disclosure that says this, mechanical system isn't complying with the 2040 requirements and will need to be upgraded before 2040. And so as a buyer, you know that that's going to be needed. And so the theory was that you sort of incorporate that into your purchase price and you plan for it. Versus somebody that's just owned it and then all of a sudden it hits 2040 and you're required to upgrade it and you never knew it was coming in the first place.
Anyone else chime in?
Yeah, I'm just reading through the report and I'm, looking at the 2025 40% reduction. Incentives and codes ensuring 50% of new buildings and 100% of new homes. It seems to me, and then we go to 2030 to all new buildings are net zero emissions. It seems to me like a long time to wait to get to net zero. And I feel like by waiting there, we'll hurt ourselves in getting to the goal of zero emissions by 2040. It seems like that's a large chunk of development that could happen in the near future that wouldn't be net zero.
I think that's an interesting point, Thomas. I think there's a balance between trying to get new buildings to go to net zero as fast as we possibly can, and also realizing that there's going to be some significant costs and making sure that we're not making it impossible for sort of new buildings to be financed. But I want to check, because I'm not sure that on new buildings, what we had suggested that on new buildings that they're all net zero by 2030. So the existing buildings lag behind, but what we were really suggesting was that there's a pretty fast drive to net zero on new buildings in the next 10 years, but that existing buildings, we have a longer period of time to get there. And we actually extend that all the way out to 2040, knowing that there's just going to be time that's going to be needed. And we also even softened that goal for existing buildings, but new buildings would be net zero by 2030 in our goals.
Yeah, I hear that, and I definitely understand on the existing buildings. I think like to see us set a more aggressive goal on new buildings.
Thomas, would you suggest by 2025 net zero?
I would. Yes, I would. Yes.
Do others want to comment on this? No. Okay.
Well, I didn't know if I needed to raise my hand since I was on the group or not. So, yeah, Thomas, I hear your concerns about trying to get new buildings there sooner. My concern, and I think one of the things we talked about with the group, is the number of new buildings that are in the pipeline now that will come online between now and then, and whether or not this would require reworking of any existing plans that are in the approval process. And we also had concerns about whether or not the grid would be able to handle all new construction at net zero, both electric wise and whether or not we are at a point technologically wise where we can cut off all natural gas. So I think there are just some technological things that we have to work out, and that was part of why we wanted to not try and force something that essentially would be in 4 years.
Yeah, I think that those are good points. I think the other thing that that we had talked about was the way in which the building code gets tested and then adopted and then implemented takes time. There's sort of the existing green building code that would then become the standard code, and then there's the creation of the new building code. And there's, I think, a 3-year lapse in how that gets updated. So I don't know if anybody has more information about the actual building code, but that would be something that I think developers and contractors and stuff would need to know what's coming. And so there would have to be some runway versus it just sort of being dropped and what that might be impacts and not knowing what the impacts might be. So I think 2025 to me, by 2030, that all new buildings are required to do that already feels kind of aggressive. But if we can speed it up and it makes sense and it doesn't sort of kill new development from happening, I think that's something we'd all be open to.
So Mike asked a question about the equity components. If we move this up, that homes will be more expensive. I don't know, Mike, if you want to say anything more about that, or sounds like there just might be some disagreement around this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm out here in Stapleton and we have a net zero builder, and I wanted to buy the house, but it was about 15% more than the house I ended up buying. And price was a real consideration. So, and I've got money. It's not an issue. So my question was, what if we did this for all buildings? What's the impact on the the equity impact here? So
well, remember that there's still all of the existing homes that are out there. You're just not going to be buying a brand new house.
Well, that seems douchey. I don't like why can't folks who make $12 an hour buy a new house? I mean,
I don't make that much and I can't buy a new house.
Well, then adding additional cost to new homes seems all we're going to do is allow that moves even less equitable.
Let me speak to that a little bit because we've talked about this quite a bit when it comes to the code process. So any kind of market change, when the market is transitioning from a common practice today that is well known across the entire market to a new practice, there are initially generally higher costs to that simply because those who are working on those designs, just the process to do it, it's a learning curve. And so the upfront cost is more, but then as it becomes more standard in the market, then you don't see that cost differential. So it's the same thing with EVs as well. The components of the EV, the design, the cost of those are more than a comparable internal combustion engine vehicle today, but in the future, they're going to reach cost parity. So I think the goal of the work that we've been doing around codes is to try to figure out how do we make the voluntary stretch code more widespread in the market and provide the training and the outreach and the incentives to get more people to adopt it early so that it's more well known, so that when we do update the code, those cost differentials are not that significant. And of course, eventually it's going to just be the common practice, and then there won't be a cost differential. So I think that the timing is important just because of the goals, but it's also important in terms of thinking how we prepare the market. So I think there has to be a balance between those two things.
And I would mention to that same point, and I mentioned in the chat, we're going to go through a wave of foreclosures as a result of COVID-19. So we just need to take that into consideration, that some people that are homeowners now are going to be losing homes, and vice versa. There's going to be investors that are going to be picking a lot of these homes up. So we just have to take that into consideration, that there'll be a whole new wave of equity that we have to think about as there's a change in the housing market. While some real estate will go up, we're going to have a lot of loss and changes in people being able to have control over their housing options.
Hey, everyone. John has asked that we do some polling on both of these questions. So I'm going to launch that polling. So we have basically two discussions going on around net zero for new buildings by 2025 or 2030, and then this point of sale transition for existing homes and buildings. So I'm going to launch this. For those of you who are on the web who can't, feel free to let Marisol know or me know, and we'll get it to somebody who's not a co-host who can actually take the poll. All right.
Jacob, can you cut and paste those questions in the chat for us that can't vote, and then that way we can give you a vote that way?
I will do that here. Okay, here we go.
And Kathy, I just want to confirm, do you still have your hand up? Okay.
Really briefly, while people are voting, I was just going to say that I love the point of sale for existing buildings, and I think that I've seen that work really well other places. So John, I'm realizing that there might be some more work we can do to streamline some of the adaptation section and make sure some of our recommendations are just in your buildings, which I don't think you're far from. So I'll contact you afterwards about how to do that, or Jacob, we can talk about how to make sure we do that.
Thanks, Dominique. And I think that's something that we started talking about in our last meeting a lot, where all the interconnections with resiliency, with waste,
right,
with transportation, like we had talked about, density bonuses and making sure that we're incentivizing density where there's transportation, for example.
Right.
So there's a lot of interconnection in between buildings and all the other groups. And so wanting to make sure that we're capturing those. Jacob, one other thing I wanted to mention with this adoption of net zero for 2025 versus 2030. I think one in between that might help that transition is to say that there are heavy incentives to adopt a net zero, if you want to elect into it earlier. So if you're not required, but if you do it by 2025, that there are significant incentives and benefits so that you're getting developers to start to push the envelope, which will help what Elizabeth was suggesting, that it sort of starts to push the use of more mechanical systems and other things to try to get to that price parity. And so I think that's something that regardless of where we go with timing, we should have as a part of trying to drive early adoption.
Great. Do we have votes in for Lori and those who can't vote?
It turned out it was this time.
I see 23 votes, and I believe that is how many people we have on the call today.
Okay. So I'm going to end polling here. Share results.
So it looks like it's 42 to 58. 42 is obviously a little lower than 58 to move it more aggressively. And then one person can't live with the point of sale. And I don't know if that person is willing to state their opinion on that one. No.
I think this may address the concern for the individual that said they couldn't live with it. We did feel as a group that you can't, even with that point of sale adoption, you can't require that in all circumstances it's required, because there's going to be certain buildings or certain issues that come up that we can't plan for. And so we did talk a lot about how there has to be some form of an appeal process or something, like we mentioned historic buildings, for example. There may be times in which it just doesn't make sense or it can't happen. And so I think that no matter what, there needs to be a process in which somebody can appeal that and maybe find some flexibility.
Yeah, and I want to recognize Thomas's point about voluntary adoption, and that was something I feel like we wrestled with, and that I was concerned about that gap between where our goals take us and where the timeline is for new buildings. That was something that we definitely had a fair amount of discussion about in the buildings group. I think that I definitely heard some interesting ideas about some of the incentive programs that can get people or get developers and buildings going a little bit more quickly on this. But, on the whole, I, would like to see us move more quickly and want the city of Denver to be as aggressive as possible on this.
Thanks, Emily. Oh, I'm sorry. Did somebody want to?
So, Emily and Thomas, I think that you're making some really good points, and I think we all want to get this done as fast as we can, and we don't want just people to drag their feet. I think one thing we didn't really talk about that might be worth clarifying is, you know, when you're building a new building, you usually start on the design process 2 years before or a year before you start construction, and then a year of construction. And so we may want to say that if your building is being delivered by 2030, that it has to be at that net zero. So that really pushes up when people have to start designing the buildings to 2028. Versus if you say that the code gets adopted in 2030, that means that the new buildings won't really start delivering as net zero until 2032, 2033. So that might be a way to kind of give us an in-between, just in clarity of what we mean by 2030.
That would be good. That might be good. The other idea, and Liz, I had the same thought, is, and this is kind of splitting the baby here, but what if we did 2028 that kind of got between the 2025 and 2030?
And that would fit well with the code cycle, as Liz just chatted to everyone. That 2027, 2028.
I'm in favor of that 2028 flag. I actually think that way back in the day, I think I put 2028 up on a Slicky note on the board for school.
Oh, you remember the days of the Slicky notes?
Yeah. The last time I think I saw you all in person.
Right? Okay. So I think it sounds like most people are in support of this compromise from the chats. In the interest of time, one of the questions in the final survey today, everyone, is going to be, are there certain concerns you still have and you want us to follow up with next week? But at this point, I think, John, and given the interest of time and where the cycles run, that maybe we can make that change, both that it's not implemented in 2028, but that is anything new in 2028 has to be the new build, so that it is pushing the planning back. Does that sound, and we're going to move it from 2030 to 2028. Is that good? Okay.
Just on that point about anything that's built in 2028, I mean, if this is a recommendation to the city, it has to be when the city code cycle is going to be completed, right? So if it's built in 2028, you know, there's a lot of nuance, right? So when the new code passes, for example, they usually give developers a period of time, a grace period, to continue their project under the old code. It's usually 6 months, so that people can at least see what was passed into law in the new code. So I think that is harder for us to understand how we would implement that, because if you're saying if it's built in 2028, it has to be net zero. Well, there may have been projects that came in a year and a half ago under the old code that aren't completing construction until 2028. So I think that's harder for us to act on than simply saying the code should be updated to have the following requirements by a certain date. And so just to clarify that would be harder for us, I think, to be able to guarantee that everything built in 2028 or whatever year you all decide on would be net zero, because some projects might have already submitted their full design and their full project. You're not going to ask them to redesign because that's a huge part of the project cost. So I think we just want to know kind of when that code cycle needs to be hitting that new standard. So, and then I also wanted to call out Katrina's idea that building to net zero in design is one piece of it. Actually performing to net zero is another piece. And so, you know, she had proposed in her comment here, build to net zero by 2025, but perform to code. So have those performance or outcome-based codes by 2030, which is a different sort of level of performance that we would be monitoring.
Can anyone not live with modifying this to Katrina's suggestion, given what Liz has just said?
I have received a chat seeing if this person is willing to speak up at this time.
I'm willing to speak up. I just don't want us to steer off. I'm just having a really hard time with all of this, just because of the obvious huge gentrification that's happened within our city. And so I just feel like us speaking about building, like the thought of us like focusing on new buildings kind of makes me, it's a little triggering for me, because I feel like we're not focusing on the people. And I don't feel that new buildings is what's needed. I feel that our focus could be on the buildings that we already have in our city and find ways that we can, you know, make them work for the people. And mind you, I'm not probably explaining this in the best way, but that is just where I'm at. And, you know, specifically, I do a lot of work outside of the Westwood community. I grew up in that community. And, you know, the gentrification that's going on right now, especially on Morrison Road, is very upsetting. And what's happening is all of our people are getting pushed out and aren't able to live where they were raised, where their you know, family were raised, and they're having to be pushed out to Aurora or further, and they're not able to see their families. And I'm seeing depression, and I'm seeing, you know, things happen within these people that are being pushed out. And I just would hate for that to happen. And so I think that as a strong task force, there's a way that we can come up with a good, and mind you, it's probably a little too late, and I should have attended these building meetings, and I apologize. But I just feel that maybe if there's a way that we can implement some other plan to help these, our other low income communities, if that makes sense.
So what I would suggest at this point, given the time that we're at, is the buildings group needs to have an equity consult with Michaela and perhaps others to look over that, so that we can integrate those thoughts. Does that sound good? In the next
yeah.
Yep. And we can reach out to Desiree as well and have her help support. I'm sure there are lots of ideas from other cities. I was just trying to pull up the city's existing affordable housing goals, and I'll put them in the chat when I find them.
Great.
But I appreciate those comments very much. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. And thank you for letting me speak up, Jacob.
Of course.
Of course.
Frank, did you still have your hand up? I saw you take it down. You're good? Okay. So I think that's a good next step. Again, the survey will show at the end of today, both the plus delta we always do, but I'm adding that third question. So we will continue to make some modifications over the next 2 weeks to the final recommendations. But thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to turn this over. Thank you, Buildings Group. I'm going to turn this back over to Jacob to talk about the revenue and the polling that we conducted over the past week.
Great work, everybody. Let's shake off solutions and let's get to revenue so we can help pay for things. Thank you. Almost everybody took the survey, which is hugely helpful as we think through all of this to understand where everybody is at. I'm going to share my screen real quick. This is a very brief summary of the survey results that we need to work through in the next 25 minutes or so. So phase 1, we had consensus around parking lot and garage fee. That's why it is a green. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for everybody. I see a couple people squinting. Is that better? Can you see that? Residential parking permits, there were some concerns. Nobody said they would block it, but people were concerned about equity and some thoughts about exempting the first vehicle, and maybe the rates get increased for every additional vehicle. The bagging, for those of you who are on Facebook Live, there's a discussion about when meters are bought out and they're bagged. So that's what this is about for commercial or construction purposes. There was consensus on that in the survey. Energy tax, there were 3 can't live with votes. And then phase 2, there's a request to add clarification that not all of these should necessarily be moved forward at the same time, and that further research and study isn't endorsement from the task force. There are 2 no votes around the retailer tax, although I think one of those may have changed. And then the other 2, there was 1 no vote on occupational privilege tax, so that's consensus -1, and same with a pay-as-you-throw, but further conversation with that 1 person, they're okay with further exploration, so we have consensus there. Phase 3, franchise tax and congestion pricing get consensus, and then 4, can't live with votes on the Pena Boulevard toll, mostly because people think it's just not feasible, so shouldn't invest resources in further exploring it. So what I would propose is we don't need to talk about the ones in green, but let's talk about the ones in yellow first and move from there. Does that sound good? And I'm not monitoring stats, so can we? Sorry, somebody spoke up. Who's that?
Yeah, it's me, Jasmine. And everything I've been working on, we've had pay-as-you-throw as phase 1.
Yeah, so the thought there is pay-as-you-throw gets passed in the phase 1 timeframe, but and so perhaps as a policy it's phase 1, but because it takes a couple years, 1, it might take a year until it's implemented to give people time, or it might be phased in over time, and then it's a $50 million investment. So then you have to pay back that investment. So it'll take a couple years before revenue is actually realized, even though the policy is passed in phase 1. That's why.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
That helped, Jasmine?
Yes, thank you.
I believe Frank has raised his hand.
Yeah, okay. We're talking about the yellow, so that's the residential parking permits. That's what the question is, right? Okay. So I do support a fee for residential parking permits. I don't support exempting the first vehicle. If we're going to be parking personal property on public lands, there should be a charge for that, especially, you know, considering that the thing that is being stored on public lands is, you know, something that is contributing dramatically to climate change, not just in the emissions that it creates, but the space that it takes is space that wouldn't be for greenery or trees, and the embedded energy that goes into it. Now, we can make that more equitable in some manner, but to make it free is perverse reasoning in this. You know, we're trying to that's incentivizing driving more, and it's incentivizing you know, polluting more. So I think there should be a charge, but we can make it equitable.
Right. So let's, unless there's something else in the chats, let's dive into residential parking permits as Frank has done. Are we good, Marisol, since I'm focused here? Okay.
Yep.
So anybody else want to talk through their thoughts as to how this would be structured?
I can just briefly say that I felt, I agree with Frank, but I think maybe we have some sort of affordable housing exemption or other exemption that kind of fits on an existing program to make sure that there's equity built in. I also think that there was a example that was in the language for some sort of transition. So if you give up your parking permit and then you can have a transit pass, something like that. So I think that would be good as well.
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I have a thought here. We're talking about phase 1, right? That's like now. And so we're going to hit folks who honestly have no alternative because our transit system's not up to snuff and getting people where they need to go. and we're gonna hit them with a fee, and I just don't think people have other options at this point. So I strongly think we should at least exempt one car, because I don't know how else we get around any sort of equity issues or any sort of actually functioning issues in phase one on the residential parking permits.
Jessica has a recommendation that maybe City Council could design what an equitable residential parking permit could look like, and that maybe the task force doesn't need to figure out all the specifics of it, but that the recommendation itself is that there would be an equitable residential parking permit fee. That's Jessica's recommendation.
Do we want to provide specificity or leave it for council and whatever process they may or may not have to design?
This is Pete. I just want to clarify that I don't believe that what we're talking about is residential parking permits everywhere in the city. I think there are only 2 areas that currently have this, and it's free. So we're looking at implementing a fee structure for the areas where the Department of Transportation Infrastructure determines that there should be a residential parking permit system.
Yeah, and so it's important to know that the reason that those couple areas have residential parking permits is because there's strong competition from people who are parking for commercial reasons. And those aren't metered areas. So the commercial parking would not have a fee, but they would be limited in terms of the length of time that they're there, if I understand it correctly. And maybe Liz, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So that's the purpose. So it's not just as you said, Pete, like my parking, I park off the street, but parking in front of my house is no permit required. And that's how it is for almost all the city. Liz, do you have any clarifications on that?
Nope.
Jacob, there is a clarification that at least the last bullet, it wouldn't be City Council, it would be Dottie. The recommendation would need to go to Dottie.
Okay, so are we comfortable moving forward with, in general, asking Dottie to design an equitable parking permit?
I do think we want to tweak the wording just a little, so it's not just where existing residential permits exist, it's where up in the top line, it's for future and existing and future, because they will expand at some point.
Should we poll this, a yes or no?
Yeah, we probably should. Let's do one poll. Let's get the discussion on the table and then we'll come back.
Okay.
So anything else on residential parking permit fees?
Did we agree that it says necessary changes include ensuring that it wouldn't count for the first vehicle? Is that a hard choice there? Or a recommendation to look at it?
The recommendation is letting Dottie design it equitably. Then that would be up to them whether or not to do that.
Thomas?
I'm a little torn on this because it seems to me like, we're just looking at existing and future, and those permits are generally in areas that are considered commercial or high traffic. Like I have a parking permit for where I live because I live on South Pearl. And I'm kind of torn on just putting this on the people that live in these types of areas. And it seems like it should have a broader focus. I completely agree with all the equity points on this and an affordable housing exemption, but I would kind of like it to be bigger. As we continue to look at our revenue needs, this is one that has a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm. So Are you suggesting that for phase one, or?
I have no problem with it being in phase one. I just don't think that we limit it to these commercial areas, or, these areas that are designated as needing parking permits. Because usually those parking permits are put in place to prevent other people from being able to park there, to free up space for the people who actually live in those areas. So I have a little bit of an issue of this just being put on the people that live in specific areas.
Mm-hmm.
I would like it to see more citywide.
Thomas, does that point or peep raised around future residential permits, knowing that there might be expansion of the existing program, help at all with that?
If we were saying that we think that there needs to be a future residential permits for all neighborhoods, then I think that would address it. But I don't see that happening in the way it's currently worded.
Looks like there's also a recommendation to change it to residential or area parking permits.
Yeah, can I ask Alana to talk about that for a second?
Yes, of course.
Alana, go ahead.
Sorry, just unmuting. Yeah, so basically the residential parking permits currently allow you to park. The idea is that you can park near your house, so they let you park on your block. An area permit allows you to park in a whole area, so that would be more about commercial or just generally busy areas where people would need to be going in frequently. Because Councilmember Hines had made a point of, do we want to say just residential, or this type of system might be conceivably not just residential. So I think adding area would include other types of land uses where this might be useful.
Thank you, Alana. Okay, so we'll...
Rhiannon has her hand raised, I'm sorry.
Okay, Rhiannon.
I just wanted to flag for the residential parking is that when I lived in Cap Hill, there were very many times where I could not park in Cap Hill, and I worked over 25 miles away, so I did not ride my bike to work, but I would always bring my bike in my car because there were oftentimes I'd end up parking like 3 miles away from my house. So like keeping in mind that those kind of restrictions with residential, I think is important. And I thought that is the moratorium on residential parking permits or the creation of new parking permits lifted. I know that after some had been implemented in Baker, there had been a moratorium implemented. And I don't know if that's over now.
Alana, do you know the answer to that?
I don't know about the moratorium, no. And Frank made a point in the chat about this doesn't guarantee a parking space. So, conceivably right now, more permits could be issued than there is space on the streets, and that you might not be guaranteed to park exactly where you want to. I think that Portland has been grappling with what happens when people are willing to pay for their permit and then you're giving permits for spaces that may not exist. And so I think they've been handling that by raising the fee considerably in the highest demand areas.
Mm-hmm. So a demand management principle is something they've been incorporating. Is that one way to phrase that?
Yeah, just that there are, it would, there's a lot of considerations for how the fee would be potentially structured. And so I think these are all good considerations, and that it would be, finding the right level and the right number and implementing it would need a little bit more thought.
So I'm going to launch this poll just because we're here. And I'll copy it over for Lori and others who can't. I think this has the major elements that we've been talking about.
And is this one where they can vote on multiple aspects?
Yeah, you can vote on multiple choice.
It's 19. Has anyone not voted that wants to vote? There's 20. I know John had to leave. I believe we had 23 in the first votes. Anyone else? Last call for voting.
All right. Ending poll now. Okay, so this was really interesting. We had a majority, 2/3, Dottie design equitable permitting, parking permit fee. Can everybody see this? Yeah, great. And that's the only one that got over a majority, over 50% of the vote. So what I'd like to suggest is that in general, based off of the initial survey, the task force generally supports instituting a residential parking permit fee, and that there is generally support for Dottie to design this. And here are some of the considerations for discussion. Is there anybody who would like to go any further than that? I think we pretty much only have the ability to say something general for Dottie to explore this. Thomas, is that you leaning forward to say something? No? Okay, we good? All right, that's where we're at. Thank you, Councilwoman Sawyer. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing these results, and we have the remaining issue to discuss. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so the remaining discussion, does anybody have any concerns about adding clarifying language to phase 2? Speak now. All right, so let's move on to the retailer tax. Further exploration for this, and Peep, I'll get to you in just a second, but let me just stage this. So the retailer tax is modeled off of the Portland model, which would be an additional, or would be a tax, which we have not done in Colorado yet, on specific businesses that would be above a certain threshold. The intention in Portland was to have it be large national chains, for instance. In general, people were comfortable for further research. Even one of the no votes, it sounds like, was comfortable with that. But there's one concern, and feel free to express yourself around taxing businesses when we're still getting up and running. This is phase 2, of course, so we can discuss that. But Peep, you have your hand raised, so let's go to you first.
I just had a question. We had energy tax in phase 1, that's in red, says no consensus to move forward. So I wanted to clarify, that's no consensus in phase 1 or no consensus for the rest of time?
Good question. That was no consensus for the rest of time.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So anything on retailer tax that somebody would like to elevate?
It seems that the concern that you lifted up was about sort of immediate COVID response. And since this is first study in phase 2, I'm curious if the, concern around that might be alleviated, since we are asking for study of it for phase 2 and we may be in a different place in that point in time.
So I think that these are, I'm going to look at the chat. I'm going to ask this person to speak. You share.
Because Jacob, wasn't, just a clarifying question, part of the study was to determine how that could even look in a Tabor, with the fact that we are a Tabor seat.
Yeah,
so
we don't even know if it's legal yet.
Because I just hate to not even understand that viability,
Yeah.
knowing that if it is viable, it could be something that is pursued later down the line when the economy is better. So I think that I don't want to push that piece.
Kathy, do you want to speak to your thoughts?
Sure. Some of my thoughts, had to do with the concerns around COVID and just how everyone is going to be. But I also had a concern, and maybe this will come later, to understand how all of it works together. But one of the concerns I had was for retailers, if we're asking them to do upgrades for existing buildings and to do retrofits and those sorts of things, this felt like piling on to me, I guess, to put it briefly.
Sorry, my internet crapped out. Can you hear me now, everybody?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Did everybody hear Kathy? I didn't, but any reactions to what Kathy shared?
I think that on this particular one, the retailer might be a slight misnomer, only in the sense that when Portland went through their rules and regs, there were other businesses that met the income thresholds that they had set that aren't just what you might think of as a pure retailer type of an entity, right? So there were other businesses that would have met the $500,000 minimum sales within Portland, and I forget the threshold for the national sales. Was it $1 billion? Does anybody remember? I'd have to look at the report.
$1 billion and 500 million within Portland.
500 million within Portland and $1 billion nationally in sales. So I think the main barrier for us is doing the research to find out if we have any entities that would meet those thresholds, or, if we wanted to change the threshold slightly, but we don't have the data to understand which businesses might even be subject to the tax. And then again, when they went through rules and regs, it wasn't just, say, like Nike, which is headquartered there, but it was also other businesses that met that threshold when they actually went through the data to try to understand that. So that, I think, is one of the challenges for us, is that we don't have all of the data to be able to understand who would fit within the thresholds. But that was the general concept of how that tax worked in Portland.
Yeah, I guess I might have a suggestion to see if we would consider moving the retailer tax to phase 3, since phase 2 is pretty much around the corner, because everything I'm hearing from retail is that it's going to take a significant amount of time for retail to rebound from this. And while we're talking about large retailers, I think you're going to see even large retailers contract where they have operations in order to make it through this. So it would seem to me to make sense to push that off just a little bit, so that we can see what the full impact of this economic disaster is on retail, because I think it's going to be far reaching.
I think the concerns that Kathy highlights balanced with the potential for revenue and some of the equitable models that we've seen from other cities, to me, underscores the reason why we should be studying this. But it just seems like we need more information on the legal side and on the feasibility and, thinking through the different revenue options and, having city council take a look at it.
And Jessica has her hand raised.
Jessica, go ahead.
I just think it's important to clarify that this is just researching it and studying it. This is not saying that we think that this should happen in phase 2. So I would disagree with pushing research and study to any further. In fact, I'm not going to make the case for this, but I might say it should be in phase 1 that we begin to look at it, right? So here are the concerns, and potentially the solution doesn't fit for Denver, especially in the economic crisis. But I think there's no reason not to study what this might look like.
So Kathy, have you been moved for further research, or which may very well say it shouldn't be implemented in phase 2 or phase 3 for that matter in phase 2?
I think you can certainly do more research. I don't think moving it to phase 1 is the right answer, because I don't think we're going to know enough about the full impact to retail to be able to make a decision based on what the new reality of retail is going to be.
Okay. So it sounds like we actually, then Kathy, have consensus, and we can work on the wording to ensure that you're comfortable with that wording. Does that work for you?
Kathy, you're okay.
Yeah, I will. If you're leaving it in phase 2, that works for me.
Yeah.
I'm not in favor of moving it to phase 1.
Okay, great. So then we do have a request for one more poll on the energy tax. So launched. And sorry, hold on, Lori. Here is that for everyone.
Jacob, on the poll for phase 1, that's research as well?
It wasn't clear.
Okay.
But for either were for, yeah, it wasn't clear in the initial wording. Okay, so I can't answer that. I think it was more for exploring whether or not it could be implemented.
We've had 21. That's about what we've had.
Okay. I'm conscious of time. We got 22 here. So I think the results of the survey still largely stand. We actually have an increase in the number of people who are indicating they can't live with for any phase. So unless somebody wants to call for our voting rules to have it be a vote and have a minority opinion if that vote passed, then we have not reached consensus on this energy tax, and this is probably at least the third, if not the fourth time we've tried to work through this. So Jessica, is your hand still raised? Okay, I'm going to lower your hand. All right. So then we have our revenue package. So sorry to end that on a low note, but we worked through a couple of these, and we have strong revenue package for phase 1. We have research for phase 2 and 3. So congratulations, that's big. All right, so Frank is, what is the task force policy on transparent votes? Frank, what are you asking specifically? Like, who's voting no? Is that what you want to know? Okay, I think we can all read your lips as a yes. Yes, who's voting no? I didn't check on anonymous, so I can probably look at that. And
Peep is asking if we can also pull the airport toll road. And Jacob, I've gone ahead and added all the rollout conversation to the final survey. So if you need to take time to do this, we can just do that via survey.
Okay, let's do that via survey. And we'll do that as well. So seeing that no one has asked to move to a supermajority vote for next time, I think we're done. Okay.
Oh, I meant, why don't you poll Pena again?
Oh, poll Pena.
Yeah,
okay.
With everybody here.
You were going to say you were going to move it to there. So do you want to start the closeout while I build that real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Hey,
yeah.
Sorry, Marcel, didn't mean to interrupt. Alana, are you still on the call?
Yes.
Could you just maybe revisit the legalities of Pena and polling it before we pull it for the group?
Yeah, I think that Celeste might have more information, but my understanding is that any revenue that's generated needs to be redirected back to the airport. So it can't go to fund general City of Denver work.
So that's why I asked for the repoll, is that I believe there's a great deal that the airport can do to continue to build out its sustainability efforts. And so I'm suggesting we leave this in the package so that the airport can continue to focus on those areas using that revenue.
Okay, so I've made that clarification in the poll, and we can launch the poll now, assuming that.
And I think one of the issues was that the airport, if you turn Pena into a toll road, not even the airport is unlikely to even be able to use the money because the money is going to have to go to road maintenance. There was kind of two pieces to how they could generate that revenue.
Yeah, thanks, Celeste. That was the point I wanted to make. I don't think the revenue can go to just general.
That's not necessarily true. There is the option to purchase it from the airport, so that is still an option that's being explored kind of on the side. So I don't think that we should say that it's not possible. There is the potential to purchase it. City of Denver could own it, and then they could put a toll on it.
So I was thinking more along the lines of, yes, it might have to go back into the maintenance of the road, but think about all the different ways that that road could be used that aren't necessarily the way it's used right now. So bus express lanes, bike lane, monorail, you name it.
So we do have a request for a supermajority vote on the energy tax. Per our rules, just to remind people about that, at any meeting, somebody can request, a task force member can request a supermajority vote on a given issue to be done next time we meet, with the interest of bringing people as much as we can to consensus between now and the next meeting. So I'm going to poll for that. That's a 75% supermajority vote per our rules. So it's we'll have to do the math on, well, they'll do the math for us. So we'll go through that, and then in the write-up, also per our rules, there will, assuming that consensus is not reached, then the dissenting opinions will be given the opportunity to write their reasoning, and that will be included in the report. Does that make sense? Any questions on that before we launch this poll?
So you're just saying that for the energy tax, Thomas has asked for a supermajority vote. So between now and the next meeting, we'll work to try to build consensus. And if we can't, then we will do that poll at the next meeting, which is our final meeting. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on what Jacob was saying.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Okay, so that's in the chat, and now launching polling, which includes both Pena Boulevard and the supermajority vote for the energy tax.
Say too that if Denver were to purchase the airport and put a toll on it, those funds would not have to go directly to the airport. Those funds would go most likely to transportation because of the toll is related to transportation. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear to everyone.
So we can change that. It's just then we're polling the same thing, Brandon. But that can be part of the further research.
Okay, as this poll is going on, I'm going to start to close this out. So in the, and I will start hounding people. In the feedback form, I have chatted it once. I will also chat it again. We really need everybody's participation. This is the plus delta, but it also adds some how each of you would like to be involved in the rollout of the final report. So please, please, please complete that. We also have any additional questions or concerns you would have about reaching consensus, especially on the recommendations piece, but please feel free to add anything about the finance, the revenue package also. And Jacob and I will be following up with you over the next week. We do know that Buildings and Homes needs to meet again, so we will follow up with that group, and both with the changing it for the codes and pushing the dates up a little bit, but knowing the code situation, and for the equity piece. So we'll be working with that group on modifying that. Naomi, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just curious that maybe this is a part of the ongoing conversations. The rollout to city council, is there like a formal presentation at a council meeting? Do they have to take any, I know these are recommendations, but do they like vote to endorse? I'm just curious what that process looks like in addition to how we roll out the final package to the public.
Great questions. We did not have time today to discuss the rollout. So what we'll do is we'll send out some of those options. There's ideas for virtual press conference, official point around presentation to City Council. So let's have that discussion online, and we'll have a discussion there. And then, as Marisol said, we'll have additional meetings, including a cross-pollinator meeting for some of the issues that are multiple.
And those options are actually all in the survey, Naomi. So if you have additional options that you want to see considered, please put those on there.
And can you just clarify what that the poll result on the energy tax, since it was a dead even, what that means?
We needed to have a 75% supermajority to move it to an actual vote for next time. We did not pass that threshold. The Pena Boulevard did seem to make headway, but there's still two who can't live with further exploring it. So that's not consensus.
And I have had a private chat that there's 2 more no votes that aren't being counted on both, but the person can't get the technology to work.
1 for each or 2 for each?
1 for each. So 1 for can't live with further exploring Pena and 1 for no on the energy tax. Okay.
So still, I mean, it's okay that we still have disagreements. We're not going to get everybody fully in consensus on everything. That said, there's a tremendous amount of revenue ideas here, amazing solutions that are on the table. And so there is, you know, over 90%, I would say, of agreement across solutions and revenue sources. It's hard to let some things go. Marisol?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, everyone. Thank you for those of you who participated in our bow ties, or scarves today, just to make the meeting a little fun. We'll try to figure out something for the final meeting. There's obviously a lot of work that needs to be done between now and the 11th. So please continue to be in touch with Jacob and I, and we will see you all soon.
Can you tell us how much money are in the recommendations right now?
We have to, I mean, yes and no. So for the ones that we have information on, we have no idea how much residential parking permits would raise, for instance. So we don't have information on some of these. For those that we do have, we can give rough estimates. I don't have that added up at this point. We can send that out.
But for what we do have, we will definitely be transparent and send out what we do have after this meeting.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for the great meeting and hard work. We'll talk to you soon.
Enjoy your gardens.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.